I remember the first night I realized something was wrong because it didn't feel like fear at first. It felt like confusion, like my brain was trying to understand something it wasn't ready to accept. I had only been working at the morgue for 3 weeks, night shifts mostly because no one else wanted them, and I needed the money more than I cared about the hours. The building itself sat on the edge of the city, far enough that traffic noise faded into a dull hum, surrounded by an empty parking lot and a line of dead trees that barely moved even when the wind picked up. Most nights were quiet, almost painfully quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your ears until you start noticing your own breathing too much. I got used to that part quickly. The paperwork, the cold air, the hum of the refrigeration units, the way everything smelled faintly metallic and sterile at the same time. What I didn't get used to was the feeling that started creeping in during my 3rd week, the sense that I wasn't as alone as I was supposed to be. It began small, the kind of thing you brush off without thinking too much about it. I would hear something faint like a soft tap or a distant scrape, and I'd pause, listening carefully, only to realize there was nothing there. The building was old, so I told myself it was just pipes or the cooling system adjusting, or maybe even my own footsteps echoing in ways I didn't understand yet. But then it started happening more often, and always at the same time, sometime between 2 and 3 in the morning, when the outside world felt the furthest away. I would be sitting at the desk, going through reports, and suddenly I would feel it, that strange shift in the air, like the silence had changed somehow, like it was heavier, more focused. And then I would hear it again, a soft, deliberate sound, not random, not mechanical, but something that felt almost intentional. One night, I decided to check. I told myself it was stupid not to, that I worked there, that it was my responsibility to make sure everything was in order. The hallway leading to the storage rooms was long and narrow, lit by flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed just enough to make the silence feel uneven. As I walked, my footsteps sounded louder than usual, echoing off the tiled floor, and I remember thinking how strange it was that I couldn't hear anything else. No hum, no distant noise, just my own movement. When I reached the first storage door, I hesitated for a second, not because I was scared, but because something about the stillness felt wrong, like I was interrupting something. I opened the door anyway. Inside, everything looked normal. The metal drawers were closed, the room was cold, and there was nothing out of place. I stood there longer than I needed to, scanning every corner, trying to convince myself I had imagined it. Eventually, I closed the door and walked back, telling myself it was nothing. I ended the call without thinking, my thumb moving on instinct, and for a moment I just sat there in the dark, listening to my own breathing, trying to convince myself it was some kind of glitch, some crossed signal, anything that made sense. But then my phone rang again. Same number, no delay, as if it had never stopped. I didn't want to answer it this time, but I couldn't ignore it either. Not when it felt so deliberate, so focused, like it knew I was there, waiting. I picked up again, slower this time, my hand slightly shaking, and before I could even speak, the sound returned, clearer now, more structured, and this time I understood something that made my stomach drop. It was trying to mimic me. Not just my words, but my tone, my rhythm, repeating fragments of what I had said earlier, but slightly off, like a recording that had been damaged. I whispered to myself that it wasn't real, that it couldn't be, but the sound responded again, closer this time, more accurate, as if it was improving with each attempt. I hung up again, this time turning the phone off completely, pressing the button until the screen went black. But the silence that followed didn't feel like relief. It felt heavier. I sat there for a while, staring into the darkness of the room, trying to slow my breathing, trying to think logically.
But something kept pulling my attention toward the window, toward the faint outline of the trees outside, swaying slightly in the night wind. That's when I heard it, not from the phone this time, but from somewhere outside, faint and uneven, an imitation of breathing, carried through the trees like it had found another way to reach me. I froze completely, every muscle locking in place as I listened, trying to pinpoint the direction, but the sound didn't behave like anything natural. It didn't move consistently. It didn't fade the way distance should make it fade. It just existed, somewhere out there, and somehow getting closer without ever crossing the space in between. I told myself it was just my imagination, that my mind was connecting things that weren't connected. But then it changed again, shifting from that broken breathing into something worse, something that almost formed my name but never quite completed it, like it was testing the shape of it.
I don't remember deciding to move, but suddenly I was out of bed, stepping slowly toward the window, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might give me away, like whatever was out there could hear it. The glass was cold under my fingers as I pulled the curtain back just enough to look outside, and for a moment I saw nothing, just darkness and the faint outlines of trees. But then something shifted, not in a way I could fully see, more like a change in the pattern of shadows, something that didn't belong. I leaned closer without thinking, trying to focus, and that's when the sound stopped completely, cutting off so suddenly that it felt intentional, like it knew I was watching. The silence that followed was worse than anything before, thick and unnatural, pressing against my ears, and I realized I was holding my breath, waiting for something to happen. That's when my phone vibrated again. I didn't even remember turning it back on. The screen lit up beside the bed, the same number flashing again, and in that moment I understood something that made my skin go cold. Whatever had been calling me wasn't just on the phone. I didn't answer this time. I couldn't. I just stood there, staring at the screen, while the vibration echoed through the room, matching the rhythm of something else I could hear faintly, not from outside, but from somewhere inside the cabin. A slow, uneven sound, like footsteps trying to remember how to walk. I turned toward the door without thinking, my mind racing through possibilities I didn't want to consider, every instinct telling me to run, but my body refusing to move. The sound came again, closer this time, accompanied by that same distorted attempt at breathing, and then something else, something that made everything finally click into place. A broken, almost recognizable version of my own voice, repeating the word hello the way I had said it earlier, testing it, learning it. I realized then that the call hadn't been reaching out to me, it had been listening, and now it didn't need the phone anymore. I don't remember what happened after that, not clearly, just fragments of movement, the door slowly creaking open, the shape of something in the hallway that didn't fit the space it occupied, and that voice getting closer, more accurate with every attempt. When I finally managed to get outside, the cold air hitting my face like a shock, I didn't stop running until I reached the car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely start it. And even then, I didn't look back. I drove until the trees disappeared, until the first signs of other people appeared, until the silence broke into something normal again. I told myself it was over, that I had imagined most of it, that fear had twisted everything into something it wasn't. But when I finally checked my phone again, there were no missed calls, no record of anything that had happened. Just one thing that didn't make sense, a new contact saved automatically, with no name, no number, just a single audio file attached. And when I pressed play, all I heard at first was silence, followed by a slow, uneven breath, and then my own voice, perfectly clear this time, saying hello, exactly the way I remember saying it, followed by another version of it, slightly delayed, slightly wrong, and then another and another, each one getting closer to perfect, as if something was still practicing, still learning, still trying to become me. And I haven't answered a call from an unknown number since, but sometimes, late at night,
My phone lights up without ringing, and for a split second before the screen goes dark again, I see that same contact trying to call me over and over, like it's still waiting for me to pick up where I left off.
I wish I never went inside that place. And the worst part is I can't explain why. Not in a way that makes sense to anyone who wasn't there. Because nothing I saw felt impossible at the time, only wrong in a way that took hours to understand. It started as a simple detour, the kind you make without thinking, just to break the monotony of a long drive. Somewhere along a narrow road that cut through miles of dry, empty land where even the wind sounded distant, like it didn't want to stay there for long. I'd been driving for almost 4 hours, heading back from a job that ran later than expected, and the sun had already dropped below the horizon, leaving behind that faint blue light that makes everything look flatter, quieter, like the world is holding its breath before night fully settles in. That was when I noticed the building, set back from the road just enough to be easy to miss, a low concrete structure surrounded by a rusted fence that leaned inward like it had been abandoned for years. There were no signs, no markings, nothing to suggest what it had been used for, but something about its shape felt deliberate, like it wasn't meant to be noticed in the first place. I slowed down without meaning to, my headlights sweeping across the front of it, catching broken windows and a door hanging slightly open, moving just enough in the wind to create a faint, irregular creaking sound that reached me even from the road. I should have kept driving, I know that now, but curiosity has a way of convincing you that silence means safety, that an empty place is just that, empty, and I told myself it might be worth a quick look, just to stretch my legs before continuing the drive. I pulled over a short distance away, turning off the engine but leaving the headlights on, their beams cutting a narrow path through the darkness toward the building. And for a moment I just sat there, listening, expecting to hear something that would make me change my mind. But there was nothing, not even insects, not even the faint hum of distant traffic, just a kind of stillness that felt too complete, like sound itself had been removed. I stepped out of the car slowly, the gravel crunching under my shoes louder than it should have, and as soon as I closed the door, I felt it, that subtle shift in awareness, like stepping into a space where you don't quite belong, where something is aware of you even if you can't see it. I told myself it was just the isolation, just my mind reacting to the quiet, and I started walking toward the building, each step feeling slightly heavier than the last, like the ground itself didn't want me to get any closer. The closer I got, the more details came into view, the cracks in the concrete walls, the dark stains near the base of the structure, the way the windows were broken inward instead of outward, like something had forced its way inside rather than trying to escape. That thought stayed with me longer than it should have, but I pushed it aside, focusing instead on the door, which was still moving slightly, not in a smooth swing, but in small, uneven motions, as if it were being nudged rather than pushed by the wind. When I reached it, I hesitated for a second, my hand hovering just above the surface, feeling the cold air that seemed to leak out from the gap, carrying with it a faint smell I couldn't quite place, something stale and dry, like a room that had been sealed for too long. I stepped inside before I could think better of it, and the first thing I noticed was how the temperature dropped instantly. Not gradually like you would expect, but sharply, like crossing a threshold into a different environment. The air felt heavier too, thicker somehow, making each breath feel slightly delayed, and for a moment I just stood there, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness, relying on the faint light from the doorway behind me to outline the shapes inside. The interior was larger than it looked from the outside, a wide open space with no furniture, no clear purpose, just bare walls and a concrete floor covered in a thin layer of dust that seemed undisturbed, except for one thing that immediately caught my attention. There were footprints, faint but visible, leading away from the entrance and deeper into the building, and they were fresh enough that the edges hadn't softened like they had been made recently. I remember feeling a flicker of relief at that, telling myself it meant someone else had been here, that I wasn't alone in the sense I had feared. But that relief didn't last long, because when I looked closer, I realized something that didn't make sense. The footprints only went in one direction. There were no tracks leading back out. I crouched down without thinking, running my fingers just above the surface of the dust, careful not to disturb it, trying to understand what I was seeing. But the pattern was clear, step after step moving forward with no sign of anyone leaving. I straightened up slowly, my eyes following the trail as it disappeared into the darker part of the building. And that was when I heard it for the first time, a faint sound from somewhere ahead, too soft to identify, but distinct enough to break the silence. It wasn't continuous, more like something shifting slightly, then stopping, as if it had noticed me the same moment I noticed it. I held my breath, listening, waiting for it to happen again, and after a few seconds it did, a little clearer this time, like the sound of a foot dragging lightly across the floor. Every instinct told me to leave right then, to turn around and walk back to the car, but something kept me there, that same pull that had brought me inside in the first place, a need to understand what I was hearing, to make sense of it before I could let it go. I took a step forward, then another, following the footprints, each movement feeling slower, more deliberate, like I was trying not to make noise even though I knew it was pointless. The deeper I went, the darker it became, the light from the entrance fading behind me until it was just a dim outline. And that was when I noticed something else that made my stomach tighten. The footprints were changing. At first I thought it was just the angle, the way the light hit them, but the more I looked, the more obvious it became that the shape of them was slightly off, like the spacing between steps wasn't consistent anymore, like whatever had made them had started to move differently over time. I stopped walking, my eyes fixed on the next set of prints ahead of me, trying to figure out what had changed. And then I saw it, the impression of something that didn't match a normal step, something elongated, as if the foot had dragged or stretched in a way that wasn't natural. That was when the sound came again, closer now, no longer faint, a slow, uneven movement that matched the pattern I was seeing on the ground.
I turned my head toward it instinctively, my vision straining to pick out shapes in the darkness, and for a brief second, I thought I saw something shift just beyond the edge of what I could clearly see. Not a full form, just a distortion, like the air itself had moved. I told myself it was a trick of the light, but the sound didn't stop this time. It continued, steady and deliberate, moving in a way that suggested it was circling rather than approaching directly. My heart started to race, the kind of reaction you can't control, and I finally accepted what I had been trying to ignore, that I wasn't alone in that building, and whatever was there had been aware of me long before I noticed it. I took a step back, then another, my focus shifting from the footprints to the direction of the entrance, calculating how quickly I could get out without turning my back completely. But as I moved, something else changed. The air felt colder again, not just around me, but specifically behind me, like something had moved into the space I had just occupied. I spun around without thinking, my breath catching in my throat, but there was nothing there, just the empty path I had walked, the faint outline of the doorway still visible in the distance. That was when I noticed the footprints again, not the ones ahead of me, but new ones, forming slowly in the dust behind me, one after another, as if something invisible was stepping forward, matching my movements exactly, closing the distance with each step I took. I don't remember deciding to run, but suddenly I was moving, my footsteps loud against the concrete as I headed toward the exit, the sound behind me accelerating in response, no longer slow or uneven, but fast and precise, perfectly synchronized with mine. I didn't look back. I couldn't, because some part of me knew that if I saw it clearly, I wouldn't make it out. The doorway grew closer, the faint light outside becoming stronger, and just as I reached it, I felt something brush against my shoulder, not a solid touch, but a shift in pressure, like passing through a space that was already occupied. I stumbled out into the open air, gasping as the normal sounds of the night rushed back in, the wind, the distant hum of the road, everything that had been missing. I didn't stop until I was inside my car, the doors locked, the engine running, and even then I sat there for a moment, staring at the building, trying to convince myself that nothing had followed me out. But as my headlights swept across the entrance one last time, I saw something that I can't explain. A set of footprints just inside the doorway, facing outward, perfectly still, as if whatever was inside had stopped right at the edge, watching me leave, waiting for me to come back. And ever since that night, I can't shake the feeling that I didn't really leave that place behind, that something from inside it learned the way I move, the way I breathe. And sometimes, when I'm alone and everything is quiet, I hear a second set of footsteps that stop exactly when I do, like it's still there, just out of sight, repeating the same path, waiting for the moment I make the same mistake again.
I should have turned around the moment I realized the stranger never once looked back to check if I was still following, because that was the first sign something wasn't right. But by then, I was already too far in, and the path behind me didn't feel the same anymore. It started late in the afternoon, just before sunset, when I decided to take a break from driving and stretch my legs near a wooded area I had passed dozens of times but never explored. The road was quiet, the kind of place where cars rarely passed, and the air felt still even when the trees moved, and there was a narrow trail leading into the forest that looked just worn enough to suggest people used it occasionally. I parked by the side of the road, grabbed my phone out of habit, and stepped onto the trail without much thought, telling myself I would walk for 10 minutes and then head back. At first, everything felt normal. The soft crunch of dirt under my shoes, the faint rustling of leaves overhead, the distant hum of wind filtering through branches, and I remember thinking how peaceful it was compared to the constant noise of the city. The light filtered through the trees in long, thin lines, casting shadows that shifted slowly as the sun lowered, and for a while I just walked, without paying attention to where I was going. That was when I noticed him. He was standing ahead on the trail, partially obscured by trees, just far enough that I couldn't make out his face clearly, but close enough to see that he wasn't moving. I slowed down instinctively, unsure whether to approach or turn back, but something about the situation didn't feel immediately threatening, just strange, like I had interrupted something I wasn't meant to see. After a few seconds, he started walking again, deeper into the woods, not hurried, not hesitant, just steady, like he had been waiting for me to notice him before continuing. I don't know why I followed. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was the quiet confidence in the way he moved, or maybe it was the subtle feeling that if I didn't, I would always wonder what was further down that path. I kept a distance at first, far enough that I could still see him, but not close enough to feel like I was intruding, and for a while it felt almost normal again, like we were just two people walking the same trail at different paces. But then small things started to feel off. The forest grew quieter, not gradually, but noticeably, like a layer of sound had been removed all at once, and even my own footsteps seemed muted, as if the ground was absorbing the noise instead of reflecting it back. I glanced behind me without thinking, expecting to see the path I had come from, but it looked different somehow, narrower, darker, like the trees had shifted closer together. I told myself it was just the changing light, just the way shadows stretch at that time of day, and I kept walking, focusing on the figure ahead. That was when I realized something else that didn't make sense. The distance between us never changed. No matter how fast or slow I walked, he remained at the same point ahead of me, always just within view, never getting closer, never getting farther away. I tested it without thinking, picking up my pace slightly, then slowing down, but nothing changed, and that was when a faint uneasiness settled in my chest. I called out, more to break the silence than to get his attention, but he didn't react, didn't turn, didn't slow down, just kept walking as if he hadn't heard me at all. The deeper we went, the darker it became, not just because of the setting sun, but because the trees themselves seemed denser, their branches overlapping in ways that blocked out what little light remained. The air felt cooler too, heavier, carrying a damp smell that hadn't been there before. And I noticed the ground beneath my feet was softer, almost spongy, like I was stepping on layers of something that had been there for years. I thought about turning back then, I really did,
But when I looked behind me again, the path didn't feel familiar anymore, like I couldn't trace it back even if I tried. That was the moment I made a mistake. I quickened my pace, trying to close the distance between me and the stranger, hoping that if I could just reach him, ask him where the trail led, I could figure out how to get out.
But the gap remained exactly the same. And for the first time, I noticed something else about him that made my stomach tighten. The way he moved wasn't natural. His steps were too even, too consistent, like they weren't reacting to the uneven ground beneath him. And his arms hung at his sides without the slight sway you expect when someone walks. It was subtle, but once I saw it, I couldn't ignore it. I stopped walking completely, watching him, waiting to see if he would do the same. But he didn't. He kept going, maintaining that same distance, like he was moving independently of me. That was when I heard it, a faint sound behind me, something like a footstep. Soft but distinct, just a fraction of a second after I had stopped moving. I turned quickly, my heart starting to race, but there was nothing there, just trees and darkness and the faint outline of the path. I stood still, listening, and after a moment, I heard it again, another step, matching my previous movement, as if something had been following me and only stopped when I did. I told myself it was an echo. Something about the way sound carried in the woods, but it didn't feel like an echo. It felt delayed, like it was coming from something that was reacting to me. I took a slow step backward, and a second later, I heard it again, another step, perfectly timed, just behind where I had been. That was when the fear really set in, not sudden panic, but a deep, sinking realization that I wasn't alone in the way I thought I was. I turned back toward the stranger, desperate now, but he was still there, still walking, still at the same distance, and for the first time, I thought I saw his head tilt slightly, not enough to confirm, just enough to make me question whether he was aware of what was happening behind me. I didn't know what to do, whether to run forward or backward, whether to stay still or keep moving, and that hesitation cost me. The sound behind me came again, closer this time, no longer delayed, but immediate, as if whatever had been following had closed the gap. I felt a shift in the air, a subtle change in pressure, like something moving into my space, and without thinking, I started walking faster, then jogging, my eyes fixed on the figure ahead. The forest around me seemed to blur slightly, the trees blending into each other as I moved, and the sound behind me matched every step, perfectly synchronized, no longer trailing, but right there with me. I tried to tell myself it was just my own movement echoing back, but it didn't make sense. It was too precise, too intentional. I stumbled slightly on a root, catching myself before I fell, and in that brief moment of imbalance, I saw something out of my corner of eye, a shape that didn't belong, moving just beyond my field of vision. I didn't look directly at it. I couldn't, because some instinct told me that if I did, I wouldn't be able to look away. Instead, I focused on the stranger, who had finally done something different. He stopped. For the first time since I had seen him, he stood completely still, right there on the path, his back still turned toward me. I slowed down, my breathing uneven, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might drown out everything else. And as I got closer, the distance finally began to close.
With every step I moved nearer, the gap shrinking in a way that felt both relieving and terrifying at the same time. When I was just a few feet away, I stopped, unsure of what to do next. And that was when he started to turn. It wasn't a natural movement, not a simple rotation of the body, but something slower, more deliberate, like each part of him was adjusting separately. And I felt a wave of dread wash over me before I even saw his face. When he finally faced me, I understood everything at once in a way that made no sense logically, but felt completely certain. He looked like me. Not exactly, not perfectly, but close enough that my brain struggled to separate the differences, like a reflection that had been altered just slightly. His expression was empty, his eyes fixed on me in a way that didn't feel like recognition, but like observation. And for a moment, neither of us moved. Then, without warning, the sound behind me stopped completely, and I realized something that made my chest tighten. Whatever had been following me wasn't behind me anymore. It had caught up. I didn't wait to understand what that meant. I turned and ran, not caring about the path, not caring about direction, just moving as fast as I could through the trees, branches scraping against my arms, the ground uneven beneath my feet. The forest seemed endless now, every direction looking the same, every turn leading to more trees, more darkness, more silence. I don't know how long I ran, minutes or hours, but eventually I saw something that looked like an opening, a break in the trees where faint light filtered through, and I pushed toward it with everything I had left. When I finally broke through, I found myself back on the road, my car exactly where I had left it, the sky now completely dark. I stood there for a long moment, trying to catch my breath, trying to make sense of what had happened, but nothing felt real enough to hold on to. I got into the car and drove without looking back, telling myself it was over, that I had made it out, that whatever I had experienced was just my mind reacting to the isolation. But as I drove, I noticed something in the rearview mirror that I can't forget. At the edge of the road, just where the trees began, there was someone standing there, watching the car, perfectly still. And even from that distance, I knew exactly who it was, because the way he stood, the way he held himself, matched me completely. I didn't stop driving, I didn't slow down, but ever since that night, something hasn't felt right. Sometimes when I'm walking alone, I hear a second set of footsteps that stop when I stop, and when I check my reflections in mirrors or windows, there's always a brief moment where it feels delayed, like it's catching up, like something is still following me, waiting for the moment I lose my way again. And part of me knows that maybe I never actually made it out of those woods at all.